How are you doing?
Okay,
Good.
we're doing well.
There you go. Nice dog. Um,
Corey, is that yours?
no, no, it's not Poppy. Poppy almost never barks inside the house. And whenever there's barking and we're online together with Corey, you can pretty much assume it's Corey's dog.
That's what I thought.
Okay? Um, let's see. So today we're finishing the last Mishnah of chapter 3, Pirkei Avot 3:18. And it's a bit of a doozy. It's a little bit less accessible um, if you're not steeped in rabbinic tradition.
Okay.
We're now streaming live on YouTube. Hey, very nice. Okay. Just a general question: how's everybody holding up with the pollen?
Okay.
Okay.
Really, it's going to warm. I mean, maybe you can hear it in my voice, but oh my
Yeah.
God,
Yeah.
Been better.
I've been neti potting morning and night. It's like it's crazy,
Usually.
but it'll get better. Okay, so back to back to Pirkei Avot. Sorry. Um, so this teaching seems a bit obscure, and we're going to have to do some unpacking and some learning to find meaning in it. And I'm wondering if anyone can bring to mind a teaching that you're familiar with that at first glance was inaccessible, or was or you just dismissed it out of hand, perhaps, but then became meaningful.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Any ideas? I mean, it's okay if you don't. I thought it'd be a good
Well,
exercise.
I've read some. I've been told, maybe sent home. We had a book to read, and then it became meaningful when other people shared, but I didn't get it.
Okay.
Okay, and then when people were sharing, then it became
More meaningful.
yeah. So
Became more meaningful.
yeah, it became more meaningful when people shared. But when I read it, I didn't get that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very abstract for me, probably, or something. But anyway, when I got to the meeting, people were sharing, and I'm going, oh, okay.
Okay. Or any teachings that or maybe another way to think about it is, what is the most challenging or difficult teaching of your religion,
Ooh.
right? That you've come to find some sort of meaning and connection to. But at first, at first blush, was really difficult and hard.
Oh, I can point out to Psalm 116.
Psalm 116. Okay.
116, I'm sorry. Yeah.
It's 116.
How can I repay Adonai for all his gifts to me? That's really stuck out at me at one point. A big task.
Ah, okay. Big task.
A lot to do. Yes. Noting it. Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else, like a text that was so Don, was that challenging at first, or did that just speak to you?
Well, when I first, I don't know, I read it many times, and maybe it was like 5 or 10 years ago, all of a sudden jumped out at me. How do I do this?
Ah. Okay.
I don't know the text, but it's something I'm still wrestling with. Why do good people have to suffer?
Yeah. So that's for everyone, right? Why do good people suffer? Um,
And I think the Psalms say, it just happens.
yeah.
If the good people, the evil people get away with it, and
And suffer. I mean, it's both, right?
right,
Yeah.
It's the indiscriminate nature that's the challenge.
right.
Okay, well, listen, if I maybe come up with a better question, this would have worked better, but it was a little broad and open-ended. Um, it does bring to mind a story of uh, a Bible scholar that I once brought to a congregation as a scholar in residence. And she began her sessions by explaining to everyone something that can be challenging to deal with in or to understand in Judaism, right? So in a traditional setting, you would think, well, in a traditional setting, we begin with a very specific book in the Torah to teach children. Now, if I were to ask you, from your experience and from your knowledge, which book would you suggest to be the best book to begin with? What would your suggestion be? Or even of the 5 books, prioritize, like which would you begin with and which would be the last one you would begin with?
Bereshit would be first,
So Rebecca's probably in Bereshit would be first,
and Vayikra would be last.
and Vayikra would be last, right? So I could see that's a pretty good, I think, assessment of maybe where all of us are. Bereshit has great stories and it's our origins. I think you could make the argument that that the book of Shemot or Exodus would be a good beginning point, or even Deuteronomy is a compendium of everything, right? But I think many of us would put Vayikra last, right? And I'm not sure. I think Rebecca knows this, and she's helping out here. But Vayikra, right, is the book that yeshiva begins with.
Okay, so what books are you talking about? Genesis,
Oh,
Exodus,
sorry, Leviticus. Yeah, Leviticus.
Leviticus. Okay,
So a traditional yeshiva would begin with the book of Leviticus,
okay.
right? And you're like, well, why does a elementary school kid want to know the rules and laws of Leviticus? Yeah.
Right.
And her explanation I thought was a really good one, which is in today's world, you can't make sense of Leviticus without some sort of commentary. And what the lesson is here is that we don't study Torah ever really without commentary, right? And now that's more obvious when it comes to texts that are challenging,
Right.
and less obvious when it comes to texts that we can grapple with on our own. But it applies in both cases. Okay, so here I'm going to bring up this teaching of Rabbi Eliezer ben Chizma, and just a nice story about Rabbi Eliezer ben Chizma, because it helps me to repeat them and kind of reinforces them in my mind, and I think it's also nice to get to know their personalities. So Rabbi Eliezer ben Chizma got that name Chizma, which he got it later in life. He was an early rabbi. Now, last week we talked about Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi right? Does everybody remember we talked about Rabban Gamliel and how he was deposed from power?
Yeah.
Um,
And the 18-year-old.
yes, and the 18-year-old Rabbi that we studied last week, Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, was put in his place and then became kind of a power sharing agreement between the two of them after some time had passed. So another rabbi of Rabbi Elazar's generation is Rabbi Eliezer ben, here in this case, Chizma. And he's a student of Rabban Gamliel's. But Chizma is a name he's given. Chizma means strength or strengthened. And he's given this name after a particular incident where he is leading the congregation in prayer, right? And this is a time when almost no one, if anyone at all, had a copy of the prayers written down. I don't know if maybe there were some copies, but that were in some central kind of authority figure or some central repository, but by and large, but no people did not have a copy. And in fact, it wasn't a fixed text in the way that we have it. So the way we have our daily prayers, especially the Amidah, right? We have um, it written word for word, and that's what we're supposed to say. In this time frame, as we understand it, it wasn't that every word was written, but that the blessings, those were kind of agreed upon. The part that begin Baruch Atah Hashem, right? Those were agreed upon and basically consistent from person to person, rabbi to rabbi. But the sentence or two or three that led up to it was open to each person to kind of have their own version and how they would express themselves and maybe play with it and kind of be open to interpretation and innovation. So it was a bit more of a daunting task to get up in front of the congregation and to lead, because you didn't just have to be able to repeat what's on the page, right? You had to be able to meld what you wanted to say with the blessing that would come at the end of each little prayer. And you had to have all those memorized, right? All, at this time, 18, what eventually became 19 blessings. So the story about Rabbi Chizma is that one time he froze, or he either out of a lack of knowledge or out of fear, he froze in front of the congregation leading them in prayer and had to stop abruptly. And what he did was instead of like falling back and kind of receding from the community in shame, he redoubled his efforts and he learned and built up his skills until he was knowledgeable and comfortable, and then continued to lead the congregation or the community in prayer. And because he reacted to this experience with strength, the strength of confidence to kind of learn more and to re-engage and to put himself out there again, even though perhaps there were some snickers that first time he went back up to lead the congregation, or some doubts, he did so and was successful and became a leader of the people. So he was given at that point the name Chizma, because it reflected his character. Now his teaching here is interesting, and it's also good to know from his background that he was considered to be an expert in mathematics. Okay? That's a good thing to know. And with no further ado, I'm going to the host disabled participant screen sharing. Corey, could you enable participant screen sharing, please? Just a minute.
Yeah, you're now a co-host. That should work.
Okay.
This is to stop Zoom bombers.
Yeah, no, that's
Yeah.
Does everybody know about that?
No.
Yes.
Oh, please try again. Error code. Yeah, it's. Okay, we're going to go a different route, people. It is not allowing me to screen share. Instead,
We see you. Oh,
you
you're
can
not
see
allowed
me.
to do, but you're not allowed to do the other thing.
There you go. So what I'm going to do, though, it's not beyond us, is I am going to.
If you drop it in, I can screen share it.
Oh, you have screen sharing available?
I don't know. We'll try. I don't know what error message you're getting. You've been getting it the past few times.
Yeah, I haven't been allowed to screen share with an iPad or an iPod.
Yeah. The other thing you could do maybe next week is send it on an email, what we're going to get.
Well, what I'm going to do right now is, I hope, I'm going to drop the documents into the chat.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I will screen share it so people can see it. So you'll have it as a document, and you can also take a look.
Well, you can't. You don't think people will be able to just open it on their own?
Well, let's see. Some people have been having trouble on their phones.
Yeah.
We do have share screen on the bottom. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, but it's not going to let you. We have it set.
Okay. All right.
Because people have been dropping, have been stealing, like basically putting up porn and all
Oh.
kinds of stuff.
Right. Huh.
Please don't put it in the right way.
Yeah, okay, you know. Oh, we're down here. We're over here.
Okay, so you should be able to, well, it's,
Put it to me, not to the group.
I sent it to you.
Yeah.
I meant to send it to everybody.
Oh, so I'm not going to be able to do work for a second. That's okay.
I thought I changed it. Hold on. Everyone in the meeting. Now file. Ah, there you go.
There we go.
Okay.
Right, we've got it.
We
That's
have
good.
it.
So I have some questions and notes at the bottom, but let's go through the text first, and then we can explore those, right? So Pirkei Avot 3:18, obscure in our day, because I think they are to most of us, but the question mark is, and in his, right? Were they obscure in his day to the same degree? I don't think so, not quite. But that was just the title that came to mind. So, right, we have Rabbi Eliezer ben Chizma Omer. Rabbi Eliezer ben Chizma would say, Kinyan ufitche nida hen gufe halachot. Right, Rabbi Eliezer ben Chizma would said or taught, the laws governing bird offerings and the key, i.e., the key to the calculations of menstruation days, these are essential laws, or really the essential laws. Okay? And he continues, the tkufot v'gematriot parparot l'hochma. The calculation of the equinoxes, right? Yeah, equinoxes, and gematria are the desserts to a meal of wisdom. So I trust that right now you all understand why I said this was obscure.
Yeah.
So let's go through first and make sure we understand what are these four different types of Jewish law or tradition that Rabbi Eliezer ben Chizma is speaking about. Then we can go to kind of what their meaning is, perhaps in a first on a literal way, and second in a more interpreted way. And then third, finally, we can go to the level of how do we have meaning for this in our time and what makes sense? Okay?
I have a question.
Yeah, Don.
Where does this, my 318 is different than your 318. I'm kind of confused here.
Yeah. So you're looking are you looking at Sim Shalom?
No, I'm looking at my Pirkei Avot book.
Oh, who is it from? Who's the publisher?
Rabbi Beryl Ween is on the Birnbaum edition.
Birnbaum. So I think I have mentioned, I think before, that there are different ways of breaking down Pirkei Avot. For example, last week we did the second half of what's in the traditional counting, I think, or the most traditional counting. And I'll hear that just means oldest, doesn't necessarily mean most authoritative.
It's the same in the Sim Shalom. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've got this. Yeah. Okay.
Right. So sometimes they break things down a little bit more, and sometimes they don't break them down more. It's all a question of each publisher and each author's approach.
What's wrong?
And here, this is in the it's all a question of how you break it down.
So where
Right,
would I find it in Sim Shalom?
It's just the last one in chapter 3. So it's probably 321 or 322, something like that.
This is to do with holiness, and this is to do with.
But that's just going to give you a translation. It's not going to, well, maybe there's some commentary there. So let's make sure we understand all the different pieces here. Bird offerings. Right, so what do we mean when we say bird offerings? Well, in particular, one of the offerings that were made via the offering of a bird was for a woman at the end of her menstrual cycle to kind of return to the community. So they're kind of related, the first and the second. Right, one has to do with the offerings one would make, and the second, the key to the calculations of menstruation days has to do with it's a pretty misogynistic thing on some level, because it involves men judging women and where they are in their cycle, and not allowing women to do it themselves. So it has to do with this having a set of understanding the different things that can happen through a woman's menstruation cycle, and being able to decide how many days in or how many days are left in that cycle, which determines when she can make the offering, also determines when she can immerse in the mikveh, and when she can be physically intimate with her husband once again. Right? So that's why those two are linked there, we think. Okay?
We'll take a look.
Okay. Then the second two things are more esoteric in some ways. Tikufot, meaning here how we balance or rectify our lunar calendar against the solar calendar. Meaning, one of our commandments is to observe our holidays in their season. Right? To observe our holidays in their season, which is different than, for example, Islam, where Ramadan is observed on a rotating basis throughout the year. Right? So Muslim people live their religious life on a purely lunar calendar. Whereas in Judaism, we feel it's important to keep our holidays in their seasons, because that's what we're commanded to do. And because each of our festivals has important connections to the land and to the agricultural cycle. Right? So, knowing how to schedule the years in the months is considered here, is what he's talking about. Sorry, when Rabbi Eliezer ben Chizma says tikufot. And gematria has to do with an interpretive method in textual analysis, where in Hebrew, the way we write numbers in the Hebrew language is with numerical equivalents to each letter. Right? So Aleph, the first letter, is 1, Bet is 2, Gimel is 3, right? And so on up the whole Aleph Bet. And there are ways to write write numbers that involve using the letters, which is why when you look on a Hebrew calendar, you'll see the Hebrew year written in Hebrew letters, right? That's one example. And so some people and some rabbis find it meaningful to do analysis of words or sentences or phrases based on the numerical value of that word or those words, and then finding other phrases or words that have the same numerical value, or sometimes it's the same value plus one or minus one or plus some sort of meaningful number or minus some sort of meaningful number. And out of that similarity or near similarity, they try to make meaning or proclaim there's an interpretive meaning. Okay?
Just like the Bible codes.
It's similar to the Bible codes, but less dangerous because it doesn't claim to like be able to that there's any kind of it's kind of like it's kind of like the mother or the father of the Bible codes, where the Bible codes are this dangerous kind of offshoot,
Yeah, I know.
right? Because the Bible codes basically make the Torah into an idol, right? Because it says that the Torah itself or the Hebrew Bible has predicts the future if we only have the right tools, or it makes it's yeah. Whereas it can't predict anything going forward, of course. It can only predict things backwards, which, as has been demonstrated over and over again by people who are better at this than I am, you can predict pretty much. You can do that with almost any book,
That's what I think.
right?
You can make it say whatever you want.
Yeah, exactly. Going backwards when you know what you're already proving, it's a little bit easier. Okay, so any first reactions to Rabbi Eliezer ben Chizma's teaching? Anybody thinks, wow, he nailed it? These are the most important parts of Jewish law? No? Okay, so this is kind of like in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, when he's the economics teacher saying, or the social studies teacher saying, Bueller, and no one's answering, or voodoo economics. No, never mind. Anyway, that might be a Gen X reference that doesn't work for other people.
I've got something here that's kind of interesting.
Okay.
It says that mathematical skills are necessary for the laws, but gematrios should be viewed as an appetizer or dessert and not as the main course. They are aids and skills that are valuable in the study of Torah and Halakha, but they are not their essence.
Okay. Now, that's the commentary that you're reading right there, right?
Right.
Okay. Do you think, I think the question we would want to ask first is that what we think Rabbi Eliezer ben Chizma is saying? Or is that what the rabbi who wrote your commentary wants to use Rabbi Eliezer ben Chizma's words to say? Right. So what I'd ask is, if we were in conversation.
Well, they're using the food analogy. It says mathematics are a seasoning to wisdom. I mean, Eliezer is that's what he said.
And what's the biggest let me put it this way. From within the Mishnah itself, from within the teaching, there is a direct, I think, refutation of that idea.
Okay.
Which is that Rabbi Eliezer equates gematria to tikufot, to the ability to intercalate the year, which is vital and essential, right? So we know that the ability to kind of make the Jewish calendar so that Jews around the world are observing the holidays on the same day, at the same time, in the right season, right? That
Mhm.
is incredibly important to worldwide Judaism and to Jews, and was still an essential issue in his day, right? And so my challenge with the way, so which rabbi is it who you have in that Birnbaum?
Um, oh, the rabbi,
Yeah,
uh, Beryl Wayne.
Beryl Wien.
Hmm.
So my challenge with what Rabbi Wien writes is that Rabbi Eliezer equates the ability to intercalate mathematically the calendar with gematria. Right? He calls them both desserts to a meal of wisdom. And the way Rabbi Wien writes about gematria suggests it's really kind of an ancillary thing. Right, that when Rabbi Eliezer says it's a dessert to the meal of wisdom, that means it's secondary or it's ancillary. And I
Yeah,
think,
maybe.
right, and I think that if we were going to say that, then we'd have to say the same thing about tikufot, about the ability to plan the calendar, because he applies the same expression to that.
Well, I think this is more in reference to what you spoke of before, and that's making too much of the gematria
Mm-hmm.
and making it the um, reason for study.
Oh, for sure. Like I agree with you, and I agree with Rabbi Wien's reading. Like I mean, I not his reading. I agree with his teaching. Okay, I would not contest his teaching in any way, shape, or form. That's what I would teach, and in fact, gematria to me, um, I don't. It's the. Let me put it this way: it's the last place I look for meaning. Would be I think one of the last places I look would be gematria. Whereas, so I don't disagree with his assessment of gematria. My question here is that what Rabbi Eliezer meant when he taught it? And I would suggest that that's not. I don't see that as being possible.
Well, I think astronomy was probably a lot more vital in this day
Mm-hmm.
as far as marking time, certainly. But maybe there was a difference in emphasis.
Astronomy was certainly very important, and that's actually kind of a battle between Roman and Greek tradition and culture and Jewish culture, right? Where um, the idea that it's in the stars or that kind of thing of astrology, which is at that time connected to astronomy more directly, I think,
Yeah, yeah.
and the rabbinic teachings that
You just need to know what they're talking
right
about.
there's nothing in the stars. Um,
So,
where yeah,
Rabbi, can I tell you here what my translation says?
yes, Ruth.
It says, Rabbi Elazar's statement establishes the guidelines for the study of Torah. Briefly, he suggested that it is not proper to begin studying the scientific or metaphysical aspects of Torah before one has filled his, quote, stomach with the meat and wine, unquote, uh, that is, with basic knowledge of Torah and Talmud.
Mm-hmm. Who's that commentary from?
Um, let's see, it was selected and translated by Rabbi Avram Davis in 1980.
Okay. And I think these are nice interpretations that I may play with myself. Um, but the question that we have to ask on the first level is, do we see evidence of that in Rabbi Eliezer's in his own words?
Hmm.
So for Rabbi Eliezer to have meant that, the interpretation that you just read to us, Ruth,
Mm-hmm.
as I would understand it, then the idea of bird offerings, the mitzvot of bird offerings and um, and the issues of nidah, of a woman's menstrual cycle, would have to equate like the core of the Torah. Like he would be referring to them because they stand in for the core of the of like all of Torah law,
Mhm.
right? But he doesn't bring up Shabbat or Kashrut or any number, tefillah or any number of other halachot that we might think of. So that's where I get kind of, I mean, these are interpretations that I myself might try to teach and to learn from, but I have a hard time imagining that that's what Rabbi Eliezer himself meant, right? So I think,
We'll never know.
you can't know, right? But you got to, the best thing we can do, I think, here is to say, okay, what do his words mean? Like literally, right? He chose his words on purpose. And so let's find some meat. Let's try to recognize in the words um, what might be there, and see, how do we bring additional ideas to bear to make it meaningful to us. But the first step we want to take is just kind of looking at his words themselves and what we know about history at that time to bring us to some sort of kind of what we'd call contextual understanding or Peshat understanding, right? Before we bring in commentary. But commentary is necessary, probably to make it meaningful to us in our day. Yeah. Well, one commentary I read suggested something that I thought interesting and maybe, if not intentional in Rabbi Eliezer, perhaps kind of right below the surface, which is that the issues of nidah, which are a woman's menstrual cycle, and the issue of tikufot, of the calendar, not so much with the gematria, but maybe, but certainly of tikufot, and certainly of the first three um, laws that are mentioned, um, is the question of time, right? That the issue of time, how we mark it, and what we call it, is integral to all three of the first ideas mentioned. And maybe the gematria also, because I'm more dismissive of it, it's something I'm less familiar with, which is my own weakness. But do you see how time is involved in all three of those?
Yes.
Mhm.
Right, because it's this, okay. And it's the balance of time and holiness.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I put there in the bottom right quadrant, or quadrant, the bottom right little section there. How does time relate to our understanding of holiness? Because
When
um,
when time is related to the Torah, it's holy. In other words, a Sabbath day,
mhm.
the lady's menstrual cycle, the planting, because it relates to God's creation, which is and the Torah is based on the Word of God.
Mhm.
Your interpretation can be anything based upon your knowledge and wisdom, but these things are eternal, necessary for life.
Well, what ideas or what things can we consider to be holy without any kind of relationship to time?
God?
God, right? God is like one, right? Because God is permanent. The only thing that's permanent. right? So God is the one thing we can relate to without a sense of time.
Right.
Although, here's the question: no sense of time for God. But when I talk about sense of time for us, do we relate to God without an awareness of time? Right? Rebecca, did you have an answer?
I'm not sure. I mean, a lot of our prayers are time bound, but
Oh, for sure. But I'm asking internally, as a human being, can we relate to the idea of God or holiness without being aware of the passage of time?
I don't think we can do anything without being aware of the passage of time.
Well, I don't know. In some ways, you can. If you see a beautiful tree blooming, you think about God, and it doesn't matter if it's the morning or the afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that would be in meditation. Yeah.
Absolutely. And as a human being who can write poetry about that moment, right? Who can be impacted by that moment. Um, what helps you to be, or what makes it possible for you to make that moment special? Sorry, not that moment. I kind of gave myself away there. What makes it possible to appreciate that tree as special, or that sunset, or that view as special?
Tissues over. Bring the tissues over.
At that time. Yeah.
Right? If it's not fleeting, if it's not rare, if it doesn't mark something, the passage of something, does it have value? Is it meaningful to us? Right? So I can function in the world without an awareness of time. Right? So I can eat and drink and sleep, not based on the clock or my awareness of passage of time, but just on what my body needs. Right? I get hungry, I eat. I get thirsty, I drink.
There's
I
still
get
your
tired,
internal
I go to
body
sleep.
clock. Still
What,
your
Ruth?
internal body clock. It's still a clock, not in the traditional sense of looking at the clock, but you still have a body clock inside of you.
You do have a body clock, right? But I'm talking about without awareness of it.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So absolutely, you do have like that body clock, but it's the consciousness, the conscious awareness of time that makes it possible for anything, not for anything to be holy, right? Because that's intrinsic, but for us to appreciate anything as holy.
When a baby is born, it has no concept of time. It has to be learned.
Okay. So what does that teach you?
Well, but the baby still develops and grows, and
But it has no concept of God either.
It also can't survive on its own, right? We're one of the few. Are we the only species, or one of the very few species that gives birth
Well,
to animals that can't survive on their own? Well,
baby birds can't unless they're fed.
baby birds can't, right? Baby kangaroos have to be in the pouch.
Yeah. No.
But most species give birth to animals that can, even if they stay with their parent, they could survive on their own, right? Whereas a baby can't. I'm not sure what that means. I don't know why that's important, but
all I'm saying is it's a period where we have no concept of time.
yeah. But do we have any awareness that we're appreciative of what's holy or not?
Not at that time.
Right? That's no appreciation of time, but also no awareness of God, as I think Ruth said. I don't know, right? But what the commentary I was reading was suggesting is that even maybe it's not intentional, but perhaps kind of undergirding all of this teaching is that idea, the importance of the passage of time and our awareness of it with a connection to holiness.
Yeah.
And then kind of went off from there. The commentary I was reading, one of the commentaries I was reading, jumped off from there because I don't think this is here in Rabbi Eliezer himself at all. Even if we're going to say that his words are undergirded or kind of built on a construction of the importance of time, then we get into a debate. We can get into a religious debate about whether we increase and progress in holiness throughout time, or we decrease in holiness throughout time.
Well, this seems to be talking about, if we're talking about holiness, there were other areas. If you touched a dead body, you had to be outside of the right.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's all kinds of things that make you unholy. And then you can become holy again
Time makes you holy.
once you've done the cleansing or the washing or the whatever it is, or the staying away for a certain length of time. There seems to be that you can calculate those things. This is what it's saying, I think. I don't know. Yeah.
So the only thing I want to correct you on, Francis, is that sorry, Margaret.
That's all right.
I see Francis's name right underneath your face right now.
I know.
So Margaret, the only thing I want to correct you on is that it's not that you become holy. People are always holy.
Right.
You become purified, or you remain impure, right?
Oh, right.
But I think you make a very good point. I mean, but I don't want that to take away in any way from the
Right.
point you're making, which is that there are all kinds of ways that would become pure and impure.
Right. Okay, that's a better way of putting it. Right.
However, and actually, in some ways, makes the point even more vital, because yes, if you come into contact with a dead body, right, you are impure, meaning you can't go into the temple. There's certain things you can't do.
Right. Yeah. Right.
And you only become pure by making certain offerings and then waiting for the end of that day.
Right. Exactly.
So the passage of time is important, but not quite as intricate and involved as with the laws of Nidah, right? The laws of the menstrual cycle. That's really one of the places where the passage of time and intricacies around it are very involved, and it takes a lot more. It takes some more significant knowledge to be able to operate within those systems, right?
Okay.
So you're right. I think Rabbi Eliezer could have used other examples,
Right.
but in some ways that also makes it even more pointed why he picks this one, and what the choice of this one is meant to convey to us.
Well, it seems like the person, okay, if you touched a dead body, you have this rule. If you have menstruation, it can be, some women can have it for 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days. And so you're in control of when you are ready to be, right?
You would be, except the rabbis take that away from women pretty much.
Okay. Well, I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, sorry.
Well, Rabbi Eliezer was a mathematician, so this would probably be something that was close to his
bosom.
Yeah, all these calculations and worrying about time and.
Exactly, right? I think you're absolutely right. He was a mathematician, so that would be involved. And so where the one commentary I was looking at tries to take this is in the debate between, is the moment of the Garden of Eden the high point of Jewish history, of human history, the most holy moment, and ever since then we've been descending a hill, right? Getting the farther away from that moment we get, the less holiness we have in the world, or the less holy we are as people. Or is it that each generation brings more wisdom and understanding, and we're able to build upon the past, and therefore get closer to holiness and build more holiness into the world. Or, then those are two linear options for time and holiness. Or is it not a linear relationship? And let me give you one Jewish response, which undergirds a very common and kind of popular teaching in modern Judaism, the idea of tikkun olam. So you'll see in the bottom left sector, it says Lurianic tikkun olam, which direction is the world headed in, right? So the way that, so Isaac Luria, a kind of a founder of Kabbalistic practice in Sfat, and that's why it's called Lurianic Kabbalah. Isaac Luria in the Kabbalah envisions a world where a high point, or the high point of in time, was at the Garden of Eden. And with the expulsion of Adam and Chava, or Adam and Eve, from the garden, there's a precipitous drop in the level of holiness in the world. And this is like, you imagine a graph through time, right? So if we have the y-axis, the vertical axis is holiness, and the x-axis, the horizontal axis, is time, right? We start at a very high point at the very beginning of time with Adam and Eve. And then with the expulsion, we have a precipitous drop toward almost to the bottom, to where the x-axis is. So very low on the y, right? So there's very little holiness in the world. But then, as we proceed out the x-axis, as we proceed through time, and people become aware of God, and people start to do mitzvot, and people start to be in relationship with God through different religious practices, although Lurianic Kabbalah would be very specific about this because it's a Jewish ideology. So it's about Jews doing mitzvot. So when Jews do mitzvot, it kind of raises the level of holiness in the world. And so what we see is we start out with holiness here, and then with the expulsion from the Garden of Eden, it goes way down. And then over time, we have Mount Sinai, we have Mishnah, Talmud, mitzvah, people doing mitzvah. We're going higher and higher in terms of the level of holiness in the world. And our job as Jews is to do more and more till we get the world back up to where we were when we were expelled from the Garden of Eden, and that will bring about the Messiah, Moshiach, right? And the way that I think Luria described it is that if you imagine the kind of the picture, the metaphor is that with the Garden of Eden, the world was kind of these beautiful pots and bowls, right? What we call kalim in Hebrew. And with the that contained all the holiness, right? All of these different vessels. And that with the expulsion from the Garden of Eden, those vessels are shattered. So they can't contain the holiness anymore. And over time, as Jews do mitzvot, we reassemble, we rebuild those kalim, those vessels, so that they can hold the holiness again. And that when we get to that point of when they're built, they're all rebuilt, that's when the Messiah will come, or for Christians, perhaps come again.
We have a bit of a problem both in the United States and in Israel because there's never been as much secularism as there is now in the world, I think. Both in Christianity and in Judaism.
Yeah.
That's my understanding. I don't know.
So we're in trouble because there's so much secularism in the world.
It seems to be increasing, not going the other way.
Yeah, well, it all depends on what you mean by mitzvot that help to rebuild those kelim, right? If what you mean primarily are ritual mitzvot, right? Just the piety of religious life, then yeah,
Yeah, but how about civility? I mean, that's not ritual.
true. Although I haven't seen much evidence that piety in religious life is any indication of civility and
No,
kindness.
no, 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 not at all. But civility has also gone down the tubes lately.
Absolutely. Well, although we can look back at the 18th, if we look back to pre-World War II America or the world, there was a lot there's kind of a lack of civility there too.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
but Ruth,
Ability. Yeah.
what you just said made me think of a quote from the Chafetz Chaim, and I thought it's a really wonderful quote to end with to kind of capture the importance of the tension between ritual mitzvot and ethical or moral mitzvot, right? So the Chafetz Chaim, let me tell you who he was. He was a very learned rabbi, and lived in late 19th, early 20th century in Eastern Europe. Wrote commentaries on Jewish law and on Torah, but on Jewish in the Talmud, but on Jewish law called the Mishnah Brura, which is a kind of updating of the Shulchan Aruch, um, which is the first accepted compendium of Jewish law, going back to the 16th century, and the same Isaac Luria, ironically. Um, so, or similar time frame, similar people. So the Chafetz Chaim, I think, if my mind is correct, he referred to America as the Treifa Medina. Right? He was trying to discourage his students from moving to America, where there was promise. While there was promise of economic prosperity, there was a lack of what he considered to be um, authentic Jewish life.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So you should stay where there's authentic Jewish life. Now, no one can foresee the Holocaust, right? Or as no one, as Monty Python put it very famously, no one expects the Spanish Inquisition, right? So we can't really put on the Chavetz Chaim that he did not foresee the Holocaust. Um, but he was someone who was certainly, the reason why I share that is because it gets across how much he was invested in traditional Jewish life. But what did he mean by that? Did he mean only learning and only ritual? Or did he mean more than that? And I think this quote kind of gives us an indication. Okay? So he said here, you occasionally see Jews who, in a praiseworthy way, learn Torah as often as possible and value their time, not wasting a minute. But if they do not set aside part of the day to do deeds of kindness, what a lack of intelligence. What a lack, right? What a lack of intelligence. So someone even like the Chafetz Chaim, I think, would say that when it comes to doing mitzvot, right, acts of kindness, chesed, and tikkun, in that kind of and mitzvot of that nature, are just as important. You need to set time aside for those as much as you do for ritual, like learning and davening.
Mhm.
I'm not sure where that leaves us in terms of Rabbi Eliezer ben Chizma.
Well, let me say something. I've been,
Awesome.
ever since we started talking about time and holiness, I've been thinking about Yisker. And
Okay.
that certainly puts a little humility in with time. Speaking of Bob Dylan, really, all we are is dust in the wind.
Dust in the wind, yeah.
So make the most of it,
Right.
basically.
Yeah, and to quote, I think Picasso, great artists don't borrow, they steal, right? It's not like, that's a great, while Dylan put that to great use, right? That teaching, he probably learned like in, sixth grade in religious school up there in Minnesota, right? that we are, the Jews are, we come from the dust, we return to the dust, right? Like,
Right.
and Dylan captured that essence, right? But he's teaching something that's an essence of Judaism.
Yeah.
Going all the way back.
It's actually Kansas.
It's actually Kansas?
Oh, dust, yeah.
Oh, the band is Kansas. Yes, that's true. No, he was like a Rolling Stone. Yeah, exactly. Okay. So I can't quite claim the Jewish roots of Kansas. Anyway, everybody,
All right.
have a good day. We'll see everyone at 5:40. See if you're coming to Minion at 5:45. And, it's a nice cool day. So make good use of it, I guess.
Okay.
Bless you.
Right. Thank you.
All right.
Bless everybody.
Shalom.
Oh.